Hey guys, and thanks so much for tuning in to this video. Today I'm going to be showing you guys how I transformed and made 3 different decor pieces for my home by turning trash into treasure and just giving some pieces that I already had a new makeover or kind of like a facelift. I just went through my craft stash and used what I had on hand, so hopefully this video will inspire you to use what you have at home and transform some of your own things that need TLC into beautiful new treasures. If you like this video, please don't forget to click that little subscribe button at the end of the video. And also I'd love it if you would consider subscribing if you want to see more videos like this. For the first project, I wanted to make over this early century, I think, end table that I picked up from a garage sale about a year ago, and it's just been sitting and desperately needing some TLC. So I got out my sander and I just kind of started going back and forth with the grain, trying to get out like these watermarks from a glass. And I also went on the sides of the table as well as on the spindled legs. And I did this because when I paint over it with the chalk paint, I do want to skip some parts and kind of make it look like there's different colors in the wood grain. So after I sanded it and wiped all the dust off, I used this 2-inch angled brush and some chalk paint by Folk Art, and I'll leave that linked down for you guys below. It is home decor chalk paint in the color sheepskin, and I wanted to see how it would look if I just lightly kind of painted over it, not putting too much paint on my brush. And I liked the look of that, but I decided to go a little bit heavier. So as you can see, I'm kind of just missing some spots and not being too, I guess, methodical where I put my paint. I'm kind of trying to make it look a little bit distressed and aged. And then again, I'm just going in with a little bit of paint at a time and brushing it on there and seeing how I like it before I add too much. I just like doing it that way. It's a lot easier to add paint than remove it. So that's kind of just what my method of how I like to paint or distress or refinish furniture. That's kind of what I have always done. So as you can see here, I just start adding more and more paint until I get the desired look that I'm going for. After the paint was done drying, I just took a piece of fine grit sandpaper and started sanding away and blending the parts where you could see excess paint, drip marks, and just trying to disguise those and to also further distress this piece of furniture. I just really like that look. I definitely recommend using like a Dollar Tree sanding block. They're a lot easier to grip and hold for things like this. However, I couldn't find mine at the time, but this worked okay. The sheet sandpaper did work really well though for the spindles or the legs by just cupping it in my hand and kind of twisting around those parts. It made it a lot easier to do it that way, and I really liked the effect that it gave me. I use this matte finish protective spray by Krylon. It's non-yellowing and moisture resistant, but definitely not as durable as like your traditional polyurethane. And I made the mistake of using a different spray on this the first time, and it turned yellow because it was not a non-yellowing spray. So that's why the top looks more painted in this clip, because I had to go back over it and repaint it after I turned the top yellow from that spray. So definitely be careful if you are using a spray or a polyurethane sealer, make sure it is non-yellowing. I wanted to add a little bit more detail and give it more of a vintage look, so I went through my craft stash and I pulled out these Martha Stewart floral stencils that I had picked up from Ross a while back in their craft section for $2. So I just kind of went through and chose a couple of different stencils that I wanted to use, and then once I figured out where I wanted to place them, I just used some washi tape to hold them down, and then I started to begin prepping my paint for stenciling. The paint color I used was just called Gray. It's by Craftsmart. It's just an acrylic paint. I didn't mix it with any other colors, but I'm just taking my stencil brush and kind of dabbing off any excess paint. You don't want to have too much paint on your brush, otherwise you run the risk of your paint kind of bleeding through and getting kind of sloppy with your stencil. So right here I'm just going in up and down motions. I'm not pulling, tugging, or swiping in any way, just using a little bit of paint at a time and only dipping back into the paint once most of the paint is off my brush. Once I was done stenciling and all of the paint was dry, I just took that Krylon matte finish spray again and just went over the details that I added. For the second project, I wanted to transform this tray that I'd picked up from the Goodwill, I think a couple of years ago, and it was someone's, I think, craft project. Maybe they didn't finish it, and it's taken me 2 years to do something with this, but I thought it was time to go ahead and transform it. So I went ahead and cut off the handles just so I could repaint it better and add my own handles, because it looked like when they painted it, they got some paint on the handles. And then I also just took my little CRICUT scraper tool and scraped off that felt that was hanging on to the bottom of the tray with some hot glue. Then I just took my little sander and just started kind of cleaning up the edges just to make it more smooth when I applied the paint. Next, I painted the whole tray in this Waverly white chalk paint. Once the paint was done drying for a couple of hours, I went ahead and used that matte finish Krylon spray again. And I forgot to mention that you want to use this spray outside because the fumes are very strong. And also, if you are using any sort of adhesive stencil on anything that you have freshly painted, you want to go ahead and use some sort of protectant like Mod Podge or some sort of spray. And what that's going to do, it's going to keep your paint from peeling up when you remove your vinyl stencil. After the protective spray had dried for about 10 minutes, it was time to go ahead and apply my stencil. And I made this stencil using my CRICUT, and I do have a tutorial on my channel of how I use Design Space and how to make a stencil. I'll go ahead and link that for you guys. But I went ahead and went with, as for me in my house, we will serve tacos, salsa 24/7. I saw a bunch of cute pieces of home decor on Pinterest, and I was inspired to make this. And our family does serve the Lord first and foremost, but we also eat a ton of tacos at least twice a week and a ton of chips and salsa. So I thought this would be a cute little taco tray and play on words, but feel free to, of course, put any sort of saying or quote that you want that fits your decor. For the paint I used, I picked this up at Dollar Tree. It's just chalkboard paint because I just ran out of regular black acrylic paint. But I'm going to be using the same method as the first project and just dabbing that excess paint off my brush. Don't go in too heavy with the paint at first. You can always go back and add more paint, but if you go too heavy, again, you run the risk of the paint bleeding through the stencil and not getting crisp lines. So once again, I'm just going in up and down motions, filling in that stencil. You could also use like a foam craft brush or a cosmetic beauty wedge or beauty sponge. They work great as well. Once the paint had completely dried for about 10 to 15 minutes, I went ahead and started taking off that stencil vinyl, and it did come off in chunks. You want to make sure that your stencil paint is completely dry, especially if you are using any sort of vinyl as a stencil. And that's because you don't want your hand to accidentally rub on some wet paint when you're peeling off your vinyl and then accidentally touch your project. So here I'm just kind of working my way, taking off chunks little by little. I end up using my little CRICUT tools to help me. One has like a little hook and one are some little tweezers. The tweezers didn't work very well for this project just because my vinyl was very, very sticky. So I just used my little hook, trying to be careful not to nick my project too much, and I did a couple of times, but in the end you'll see that I went back with just some of that Waverly white chalk paint and touched up the spots that I nicked. To add the detail and the handles to the tray, I took about 1.5 of these rolls of decorative nautical rope from the Dollar Tree and just began unraveling and then doing a simple braid. I braided the whole rope, and then all I did was just take my hot glue gun and started hot gluing it to the sides of my tray and making sure to go all the way around and cover up those holes where the handles were on the outside. For the handles, I just tied 2 knots at the end, took my scissors and cut off the excess fringe. I wanted a little bit of fringe, but not too much. And then all I did was just hot glue those down to the bottom, making sure to cover up the inside holes. And then I just took another little daub of hot glue and kind of stuck the knot at the end to the side. The very last project was probably my favorite, and it is literally a trash to treasure because it came from the depths of my garbage can. I had recently thrown this project out. This was a previous DIY that I did a couple years ago. I made a farmhouse mirror, and one of the mirrors had broken, and I had recently made another farmhouse mirror, so I decided to throw this one out. But when I was laying in bed, I was really regretting it, thinking I could repurpose this project even though it was broken. So what I'm doing here is I'm just ripping off the poster board that I had E6000 and hot glued it to, because I'm going to reuse the frames. So after I got all of that poster board pulled off, for the most part, there's still some pieces stuck. I just took my needle nose pliers and started pulling out all of the little metal tabs that hold the backing in. And 2 of my frames were in pretty good condition, being that they were thrown away in half in the garbage can. And then the other 2 were completely busted. So I had to go ahead and use some popsicle sticks to reinforce those things and put them back together. And you'll see that in a minute. But right here, I'm just kind of assessing the damage, trying to pull off anything that might show on the sides. So I'm just kind of cleaning them up a little bit. All right, so right here it is Hot Mess Express, but trust me, it's gonna look awesome when it's done. So I'm just taking my needle nose pliers again, and on the frames that were busted, I just took out the connector pieces with my needle nose pliers, and that's so when I hot glue everything together, nothing's really sticking out or has any gaps. To reconstruct or reattach the frames, I just took some hot glue and put them on the edge of one of the connecting pieces, put them down in place, lining them up, and then I took these craft sticks from the Dollar Tree and I just hot glued them and connected the 2 pieces together as kind of like an anchor and extra support. Once I Frankensteined those frames back together, I just took an extra piece of scrap chicken wire that we had from when we redid our chicken runs in our chicken coop, and I just stapled those to the back of the frame. And I will say this, if you go the extra mile and hot glue the popsicle sticks all the way around the frame, frames, it'll help out a lot because that staple gun did go through the entire frame at a couple of different spots. So that's just an extra little tip or something that I learned from this DIY project. Chicken wire is not fun to work with, so be careful not to scratch up your arms. And I just started working from the center out, stapling away at this thing and kind of stretching that chicken wire to try to make it as flat as possible because it naturally wants to curl up because that is how it's rolled. So after I stapled the crap out of this thing and made sure it wasn't going anywhere, I just took my wire cutters and started kind of trimming off the excess that was hanging over the edge, trying to be careful and make sure that nothing was kind of poking out or kind of bending back pieces, making sure that they weren't going to like scratch up my wall or anything once I put this up. And it is a little bit off center. Just because I did, again, Frankenstein these things together. It would probably look more perfect if you did maybe use brand new Dollar Tree frames, but I wanted to reuse these and I like the imperfectness of it all. And I am going to be covering up, I have a little trick that I'm going to do at the end to cover up the part that is kind of off center. I recently picked up this little galvanized flat bucket from Hobby Lobby for I think like $2 in their clearance section, and I thought it'd be perfect to throw on this. I was going to use it for something else, but I thought it'd be perfect to put in the center of this little farmhouse chicken wire window. That way I can change out the flowers in the bucket from season to season and I can incorporate it in all of my seasonal decor. It's that easy. So here I am, I'm just taking some E6000 glue and generously putting it in the center of those frames. And then I go add some hot glue to the back of that galvanized bucket. I just like using hot glue and E6000 together just because I like the permanent hold of the E6000 for longevity and then the quick setting power of regular hot glue. And then the final touch to this project was just to add a burlap bow to the top where the frames are kind of uneven to kind of hide it. And I didn't make the bow on camera because you guys, I suck at making bows. This is just something I kind of threw together. So that is it for this project. I think it turned out good for coming out of my garbage can. Alright guys, so that's it for my 3 trash to treasure projects. I really hope you guys enjoyed this and I hope it inspired you to create something out of stuff in your home or things that you might want to give a second chance. And I hope, again, you guys will consider subscribing. If you haven't, go ahead and like this video if you enjoyed it. And I will see you in my next one. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.